This analysis addresses the critical, fast-moving diplomatic developments surrounding the Russia-Ukraine conflict, focusing on the proposed US-Russia summit and the strategic implications of potential long-range missile transfers. Summary and analysis of the crisis. The ongoing Russia-Ukraine war has entered a high-stakes diplomatic phase, driven by the efforts of President Donald Trump, who has promised to end the conflict quickly. This new pivot is defined by three intersecting elements: the concept of a stop-where-they-are ceasefire, the proposed bilateral summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Budapest, and the intense debate over supplying Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk missiles. Analysis: Trump's stated preference to avoid providing massive numbers of very powerful weapons, like the Tomahawk missiles, underscores his desire to force a swift, negotiated end rather than pursue a military victory for Kyiv. The decision to meet Putin in Budapest, a city championed by Viktor Orban, a known ally of both leaders and a critic of Western support for Ukraine, is a significant diplomatic maneuver. It signals a move toward a settlement where Ukraine's interests may be negotiated in its absence, potentially violating the fundamental diplomatic principle of nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. The timing, immediately preceding a meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, indicates the Tomahawk transfer is being used as powerful leverage, a clear threat to Putin that military escalation remains an option if diplomatic efforts fail, and a promise to Zelenskyy that aid is contingent on his readiness to negotiate. Reasons and consequences. Motivations for the diplomatic pivot from the U.S. mediator Trump. The primary motivation appears to be securing a high-profile diplomatic victory, possibly motivated by the prospect of a Nobel Peace Prize, as alluded to in his own remarks about having solved 8 conflicts. By threatening the delivery of the Tomahawks, weapons with a vast strike range, Trump maximizes his leverage over Putin, aiming to make the status quo, continued war, appear more costly to Moscow than negotiations. This aligns with his campaign promise to conclude the war swiftly, demonstrating a willingness to use both the stick, Tomahawks, and the carrot, economic cooperation prospects. From Russia, Putin, Moscow's eagerness to participate in the Budapest summit, which the Kremlin called extremely frank and trustful, is rooted in a desire to legitimize its territorial gains and sow discord within the Western alliance. The prospect of negotiating directly with the U.S. without the participation of Kyiv or other major EU-NATO partners lends credence to the Russian narrative that the U.S. is the ultimate decision-maker. Simultaneously, Russian officials have issued strong warnings about the Tomahawk delivery, viewing it as a major escalation and a sign that Putin might be losing Trump, indicating the threat is a genuine concern for the Kremlin. Consequences for stakeholders. For Ukraine, the most immediate consequence is vulnerability. By having its fate discussed in a summit it does not attend, Ukraine risks being pressured into major concessions, such as formally abandoning its NATO aspirations and de facto recognizing Russia's control over occupied territories, including Crimea and parts of the eastern oblasts. Zelensky's priority remains ironclad security guarantees and a ceasefire on favorable terms. Being sidelined in Budapest weakens his position drastically. For Russia and NATO, the proposed meeting strengthens the narrative of Hungary and Orban as key power brokers, undermining the collective unity of the EU and NATO in supporting Kyiv. If the war is frozen along current front lines, a likely outcome of the stop-where-they-are proposal, Russia achieves its immediate military objective of securing its seized territory without having to withdraw. The Tomahawk effect. If the Tomahawks, with a range of up to 1,550 miles, are delivered, they would be a major military escalation. These missiles, launched from ground-based Typhoon systems, could bypass defenses due to their low-altitude flight, allowing Ukraine to strike deep into Russia, targeting critical oil infrastructure, logistics hubs, and military command centers. This would apply unprecedented economic and military pressure on Moscow, potentially accelerating the war's end, but also drastically increasing the risk of direct Russian retaliation against NATO allies or further escalation. Prediction and solutions. Prediction: the Budapest summit, scheduled so quickly, is likely to be a diplomatic testing ground rather than a final peace conference. Likely outcome: the summit will likely result in a limited, non-binding agreement to begin formal negotiations, possibly coupled with a temporary, localized ceasefire along key front lines. A comprehensive peace deal is improbable because the maximalist demands of both sides, Russian territorial detention versus Ukrainian demand for 1991 borders, remain irreconcilable. Trump is likely to emerge claiming a breakthrough, having established the U.S. as the essential mediator. The Tomahawk threat. The Tomahawk missiles are primarily a bargaining chip. Trump will likely withhold immediate delivery but maintain the threat, providing Putin a strong incentive to engage seriously. Delivery will only occur if Putin stonewalls the negotiations, thereby forcing the U.S. to choose military escalation over diplomatic failure. Potential solutions and off-ramps. A realistic long-term solution must decouple the immediate need for a ceasefire from the politically impossible territorial dispute. An armistice for security model presents a viable path. 1. Immediate armistice, a definitive ceasefire overseen by an international monitoring mission, freezing the conflict along current lines. No formal recognition of territorial changes is granted. 2. Ironclad security guarantees. In exchange for the armistice, Ukraine receives robust non-Article 5 security guarantees from the US, UK, and other key European powers, covering rapid military aid, intelligence sharing, and economic support in the event of any renewed Russian aggression. 3. Future status. The final political status of the currently occupied territories is deferred for a generation, much like the Korean Peninsula armistice, allowing both sides to save face and prevent further bloodshed, while focusing on security and economic recovery. This approach offers Putin a cessation of hostilities and a halt to Western offensive weapons, while providing Ukraine with the only true prerequisite for long-term survival: credible, externally backed security.